thing to be a keyboard warrior, and I think most of the time that's me. What I mean by that is I'm in a studio, maybe I'm typing on Twitter, but I'm not in any physical risk. If I'm brave, well, it's easy to be brave when you're on this side of a keyboard or a phone. But what about if you're in the world? And once in a while, I do get out of the office. But what if you go out into the world and literally wear on your body a billboard, a sandwich board, as they used to be called, stating blunt truths that are politically incorrect? And what if you go into the world's most progressive places wearing this billboard on your person, saying things like no one was born in the wrong body, or children should not be on puberty blockers? These are comments, of course, about the transgenderism out there. What if you were to physically go out into some of the most, quote, progressive cities like that and engage with all your critics? Well, that is a very rare sort of courage, not just an emotional courage, but a physical courage, because as I don't need to tell you, the left, when confronted by a narrative that they don't agree with, well, their response these days is not often to debate, but rather to cancel. And if you're standing there in person, canceling you is at the very least screaming at you and too often assaulting you. By now, I think you probably know who I'm talking about. His name is Chris Elston. He lives in one of those progressive cities, Vancouver, but he travels around the world with his simple message and one by one tries to win over hearts and minds. And he joins us now back at his home in Vancouver. Chris Elston, also known as Billboard Chris. Great to see you again.
Thank you so much, Ezra. It's been a fun time since we chatted last. I've been all over the United States. I've been to Philadelphia, New Jersey, Florida. I just got back from Chicago. I was at the Republican debate in Milwaukee, making some good friends there. So I'm having fun spreading the good word.
Yeah, well, it takes a special person to go into the lion's den. I saw one of the interactions in Chicago. Chicago is a very Democrat city. Now, there's a certain conservative sensibility too. City of broad shoulders, windy city, butcher shop to the world. It has sort of there's a tradition there too, but it is very Democrat. That's the home of Barack Obama and Oprah. Tell me a little bit about what you were doing in Chicago, what your billboard says. And by the way, we've got a couple of clips from your journeys around America that we'll show, just to show people exactly what it is that you do. But give me a little bit of a warm up for what you were doing in Chicago and why you were there.
Sure. So I had been up in Milwaukee, which is just a couple hours north, for the debate and for a few events beforehand. Because really exciting news, I'm going to be working with this conservative organization called the Leadership Institute going forward. And I'm going to be speaking at formal events inside of universities all throughout the United States, doing town halls and things like that. So that's very exciting. I'm sure some mini riots will break out at these universities and the left will do exactly what we want, which is generate all sorts of media. But I was just up the road, so I thought, well, I'm in town. Let's go down to Chicago for a few days and do my thing out on the streets. And they also have a children's hospital there called the Lurie Children's Hospital of Chicago. This is one of really 4 main gender clinics across the US, going way back more than a decade. This is a clinic funded by Jennifer Pritzker, who's one of the billionaires who has been funding this going back a long time. He's a man who now says he's a woman. He, of course, is the cousin of J.B. Pritzker, who's the governor of Illinois. So I went to that children's hospital and had some conversations outside there, started thousands of conversations inside the hospital because, of course, they all see me outside. So what I'm trying to do is educate one person at a time. I combine that with social media, where these videos are now seen oftentimes more than 1 million times. But then it's also the conversations I start out on the street that I'm not necessarily a part of. All of this leads to creating awareness about what's going on. So that's why I went to Chicago. And as usual, when you go outside, good things happen.
Yeah, you know what? We think that way sometimes here at Rebel News. I mean, you can be in the studio with your set piece speech. I guess that's what I do in my monologues. But when you go into the world and interact with real people, you never know who you're going to meet. You never know what you're going to say or what they're going to say. It really, and it is sort of a missionary approach to go, put your best foot forward and try and talk to people one at a time. Hey, Chris, how many people would you estimate that you've spoken with over all the dozens of times you've hit the streets? I'm guessing it would be in the thousands.
Yeah, I've probably been out on the street. My best estimate is probably about 2,500 hours out on the streets and at university campuses. So probably 20,000 conversations. Some of them are short. Of course, there's many more interactions than that, but I've heard everything that the left has to say, and really they only ever have the same two or three things to say. I sometimes call this the gender wars attack of the clones because it's the same exact argument every single time. All they have to say is that kids are going to kill themselves if you don't let them transition. This is the number one argument they always say. It's a despicable manipulation. It's used to coerce parents to go along with this. They're told you can have a dead son or a trans daughter.
Yeah.
These people believe that puberty blockers are reversible, which of course is not true. Time is not reversible. If you stop a child from going through their natural development for years, they don't get to go back to when they were 10 years old and resume going through puberty. Those years of development are gone. And there's a few other arguments that these people come up with, but it's very helpful to go out on the street. You see a totally different perspective than you would just online. And I think as humans, we evolved to talk to each other one-on-one. And I think it's still really important that we do this in the real world, not just online where we're in our echo chambers. So that's why I started going outside to do this, because I think it's really effective at spreading the word to people who would otherwise never hear any of this.
I think you're exactly right. And it's not surprising to me that your critics have like 2 or 3 message tracks, and because it's all they've heard. And once they've said them, they feel, okay, I did my duty as a good progressive person. I said what I've heard 100 times, but they've never heard the reaction or the response to it. So if you press them with a supplemental question, they don't have a depth there. They're just, oh, I've heard this line, here's what to say. I've said them, but I would imagine that once they've pushed play on those little audio tracks in their mind, they really don't have a lot to go on, because I don't think there's a depth of, I don't think they've really thought this through. I think, oh, this is the latest thing. It's like Black Lives Matter or a Ukraine flag on their Twitter avatar. This is the new thing. Global warming, transgender. Let me just pick up a few talking points so I sound au courant and fashionable. I think that people have not thought these things through deeply. Would you say that's generally true, Chris?
They haven't thought this through at all, Ezra. So I have a couple tactics really that I use. One is to ask questions. What does it mean for a girl to be a boy?
Right.
Right away, nobody can answer that.
Right.
What is a transgender child?
Right.
In 3 years, Ezra, no one can give me a definition. And I'll say things that they agree with as well. The people who are more hostile or maybe on the fence, if you say things that these people agree with, first of all, you're accomplishing a couple things. You're dropping down some barriers that they have where they think you're evil and you're some terrible person. Because if you say something like, look, I don't think we should put these kids in some stereotypical box. All these kids are beautiful just as they are. There's no right way to be a girl or a boy. They all will agree with that. And so right there, you've broken down this wall.
And you show you care. You show you're not a hard-hearted monster, that you're motivated by the same things that they would like to claim they're motivated by.
That's right. And you've confused them at this moment, which is honestly a great result of any of these conversations with the activists who are pushing this, because you've created at that moment this cognitive dissonance where there's now 2 competing ideas in their brain. They thought you were some evil bigot. Now you just said something loving and true, and it is true, and it is loving. And they can't help but disagree with it. So now they're very confused. So they're going to have to go home and look up what you actually believe. And maybe they'll start questioning a little bit more. Because I do see this as something akin to a cult. And with all cults, you never get anyone out just by telling them that they're wrong. They have to start questioning this themselves, and that's how they eventually come out of it. Because let's face it, these people are mostly victims who then become the recruiters. It's a lot of young women who, as girls, were led to believe that this was the compassionate approach to take and that they were saving kids' lives by transitioning them. But it's all a lie. So they're not all inherently evil. Yes, some of these people are, for sure, but most of them have just been indoctrinated. So there's no point just fighting with these people. You have to find a source of agreement.
I was in the UK a month or 2 ago at a conference, and I heard something I'd never really heard before, and maybe that just shows that I'm not as well read as I ought to be. But it was a gay man. He was with the Gay Men's Network, and he said that transgenderism is, in its essence, anti-gay. And I thought, what are you talking about? He said, if he had grown up in this era, instead of just being gay, they would have said, no, you are in the wrong body, you're a woman, and they would have chopped him up. And he says the T in LGBT is essentially opposite to the L and the G. And he was so furious with two parts of it. First of all, the mutilation, and second of all, the focus on children. And I was just astonished to hear these things. I hadn't heard them before. I don't know. I thought I would share that with you because I think the idea that you're born in the wrong body is so bizarre and novel, and we don't think through what that means all the way. What do you think of that? I mean, maybe your old hat, that's old hat to you, but that was the first time I heard it put so passionately and by a gay man.
Yeah, no, I talk about this all the time. If you look at all the studies into gender dysphoria, which is really just self-loathing, and going way back before they gave kids puberty blocking drugs, there's about 12 different academic studies, and all of these studies into children with gender dysphoria, back when this affected a handful of kids. All these studies show the same results. More than 80% of these kids just outgrew it when they went through puberty, and a majority grew up to be gay. This used to affect boys way more than girls. Now that's completely flipped. It's 3-to-1 girls versus boys. But yes, a lot of these kids would grow up to be gay. Really effeminate little boys, it makes a bit of sense. Now, because this ideology hinges on one thing only, regressive stereotypes, these kids who defy these stereotypes, who are a little bit different, are now being led to believe that they must be trans. They must have been born in the wrong body. What a psychologically abusive thing to tell a child, that you're born wrong. This makes no sense at all. We should be telling them they're beautiful just as they are, but this is the worst possible messaging ever. So I always tell people, when you play this pronoun game, if you're a teacher and you're going along with all this pronoun business with these kids, every time you call a girl a boy, you call her he, him, you're sending her this message that she was born wrong and that she should be something that she's not. This is an abusive ideology right from the very get-go. The whole thing needs to be abolished.